Good, e- good evening, শুভ সন্ধ্যা, good morning, যেদিকে আপনারা থাকুন পৃথিবীতে. Today we are starting the second lecture of the Citizens Forum. The topic for today's lecture is Rammohun Roy, the Colonial Patriot and British India's first freedom movement. This talk would be given by Sri Rajib Gangulee. Now it has been given my task to introduce Rajib Gangulee to you, all of you. But I believe that Rajib Gangulee is a person who now needs no introduction. Because Rajib Gangulee is currently the grandson of Prabhat Gangopadhyay. Those of you who may know, Prabhat Gangopadhyay was a great historian and was the son of Dwarkanath and Kadambini Gangulee. A brief biodata of Rajib Gangulee is that he was born in Kolkata on 26th of September 1959 and was a postgraduate from Calcutta University, specializing in accountancy in 1981. Thereafter, he studied MBM at Calcutta University from 83 to 85 and joined DVC or Damodar Valley Corporation in 1986, from where he retired as the Deputy Financial Advisor. Although a finance man, Sri Gangulee is passionate about the history of the 19th century of Bengal. He is currently writing a biography on his great-grandfather, Obolabandhav Dwarkanath Gangopadhyay. So I would now like to request Sri Rajib Gangulee to come and address the gathering.
Namaskar, and a very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all living in USA, UK, and India. For quite some time, Shudakhina has been asking me to speak about Raja Rammohun Roy before this august audience. To be very honest, I did not dare to respond to her request. I am neither a man of history nor have the competence to talk about this unique man of his era. I considered speaking whatsoever to be nothing but my audacity. But few days back, I was going through a very interesting book titled British India's First Freedom Movement by Subarna Ghosh and Ashoklal Ghosh. This book brought into focus some political aspirations and strivings of native people of British India, which unfortunately not became part of the history of our freedom movement. This book encouraged me in understanding the patriotism of Rammohun, who amid all attacks never lost sight of his mission to uplift his countrymen. In Rammohun's period, the people of all class were supposed to have an apolitical mind and wanted to be left alone to live their own lives. In para 3 of the Memorial Against Press Regulation 1823 to the Supreme Court of Kolkata, Rammohun writes, "It is well known that a great body of natives of wealth and respectability, as well as landholders of consequence, offered up regular prayers to the object of their worship for the success of the British arms, from a deep conviction that under the sway of that nation, their improvement, both mental and social, would be promoted, and their lives, religion, and property be secured." British were known to have met more than their expectations. But there was Raja Rammohun Roy, the cosmopolite, the nationalist thinker, the representative man with a universal outlook who prepared the ground of our independence. Now, by 1793, the British East India Company had firmly established their power in Bengal in the east and Madras in the south. Gradually, they also established their hold over some small provinces, but their major threat was the Marathas, who had the majority of the Indian territory under their belt. The Third Anglo-Maratha War in 1818 was the final and decisive conflict. With the defeat of Marathas, the British East India Company had acquired control over a major part of India. Now, one of the many beliefs on which the British Empire in India rested in its time and still runs strong is that after 1818, there was no Indian power which could question the authority of the British East India Company or raise their voice against it. What historians overlooked is that in 1820s, British was not the only lion in India. On the west, Maharaja Ranjit Singh made the Sikhs a strong political force and was making rapid strides towards an extended empire up to Kashmir. The British East India Company was forced to make a treaty with the Sikhs, outlining Sutlej River to be the border of the Sikh territory. And they remained silent till Maharaja's death in 1839. Now in the east, Burma was then acquiring the status of an upcoming power by conquering Assam, Manipur, Arakan, Kachar, etc. They even put into questions the British power by demanding Murshidabad and Kolkata also. During this period, a major propaganda was initiated from Kolkata also, which not only aimed in ending the foreign domination, but also at establishing a constitutional form of government in the country. No doubt, during this time, British had the strongest force and was thinking not only consolidating its supremacy in the areas already they had in their possession, but also of moving across the Indus to bring Afghanistan within its sphere. A popular view is that Rammohun left home on account of a family disagreement for his essay calling in questions the validity of the idolatrous system of the Hindus. On the other hand, Dr. Lant Carpenter claims that Rammohun, at the age of 15, he left his paternal home and sojourned for a time in Tibet so that he might see another form of religious faith. Not going into any debate on this issue, I would like to draw your attention to another sentence of this autobiographical letter, which is very important. As early as in 1788, he had developed in his mind a feeling of great aversion to the establishment of British power in India. And for that resentment, he left home at the age of 16 and spent about 4 years traveling chiefly within, but some beyond the bound of Hindustan. It is unfortunate that whenever Rammohun is found talking about his aversion to British rule, the historians somehow put it suppressed or ignored it. It is also true that while talking about his political program or his claim for the political rights for his fellow countrymen, it will invariably be added that he had sincere allies to the British rule and supported colonialism. During 1821-1822, in a published pamphlet titled, the title is a bit long, I just read it out, a brief remarks regarding modern encroachments on the ancient rights of females according to the Hindu law of inheritance. Now, in this pamphlet, Rammohun tried to make people responsive to the idea of revolt by saying what their forefathers in Satyajug had done under the personal command of the celebrated Parashuram, the consequence of which India enjoyed peace and harmony for a great many centuries. In the same pamphlet, he stated, I just like to quote what, at an early stage of civilization, when division into caste was first introduced among the inhabitants of India, the second tribe who were appointed to defend and rule the country, having adopted arbitrary and despotic practices, the others revolted against them. They defeated the royalists in several battles and put cruelly to death among almost all the males of that tribe. Now, what striking here is that he not only put emphasis on the need of ending the despotism, but the emphasis was led to end it by violence. A very few historians have taken notice to this assertion in evaluating Rammohun's political standings. Evidences are there. Serious researchers may take interest in it. The political significance of such an assertion made and circulated freely in India under the British rule was more than obvious. Soon after, in a report submitted by Mr. William Bailey, the Chief Secretary to Bengal government on 10th of October 1822, accused Rammohun and his friends for carrying on rebellious brainwashing against the British rule. Contemporary observers like Abbe Dubois, Mount Stuart Elphinstone, Bishop Daniel Corey also imputed on Rammohun for spreading subversive ideas. Talking about people clamoring for political privileges, Corey identified two groups of people and one individual. The groups were the Anglo-Indians and the enlightened Hindus, and the individual, Raja Rammohun Roy. This you can have in the biography of Bishop Daniel Corey, edited by, published by his brothers, George and Henry Corey. Now, the period between 1816 to 1822, England was gripped by a conspiracy of silence. The Court of Proprietors of the East India Company believed that a section of English people were praying that the revolutionary France would come to conquer England and liberate them. So they preferred not to allow to come before public what those people were thinking what they were hoping or trying to do. It was not a complete success. The truth was just kept secluded. Rammohun, meantime, realized that newspapers can be the instrument for diffusing the intellectual light among the people. He and other Indian, Harihar Dotto, read imported English newspaper and had close contacts with those Europeans who did not consider themselves as committed to uphold the greatness of England. Now, this Harihar Dotto was the son of Tarachand Dotto, the eminent Bengali journalist, and one of the founders of the Bengali weekly Sangbad Kaumudi. When Harihar Dotto's Urdu newspaper, Jami Jahan Numa, was first published on 27th of March, 1822, the readers dubbed it as an appendix to the British establishment, a semi-official gazette, and an ally to company's administration. But Bailey found Jami Jahan Numa to be capable of turning into an engine of serious mischief by discussing openly and unreservedly the governance pursued in Awadh and in any other states allied to the British government. Bailey's assessment was based on direct monitoring of the paper for the first 6 months issue, which shows that though cautious, it was an instrument of political awakening. Rammohun's own weekly paper in Persian language, Miratul Akbar, apart from giving news of the day or writing about sotis, took interest in discussing the merits of the English Constitution. It started drawing attention to the native Indians to examine the British policy followed in England vis-a-vis the policy followed for their native subjects in India. In 1822, we find Rammohun writing an editorial in Mirat against public flogging of a Jamindar of Kumilla, Mr. Pratap Narayan Das, who had succumbed to the injuries. Now, this public whipping was ordered by John Hayes, the magistrate of Tipera, under Regulation 9 of 1807. Under this regulation, any magistrate could order public flogging to the natives at his discretion. Rammohun's editorial was translated into English and published in the Calcutta Journal on 14th of May, 1822 by its editor James Singh Buckingham, who was a great friend of Rammohun. As a result, Justice Hayes was tried at the Supreme Court. Now, Bailey was convinced that the only way to curb the trend displayed by Jami Jahan Numa, Miratul Akbar, and other native papers was to enforce a stringent law for the press. We know up to the year 1798, no restrictions on press in India was inflicted, except in 2 occasions. One when James Augustus Hickey's Bengal Gazette was alleged publishing libels against Warren Hastings and the other officials of the British Empire by raising issues of corruption and malpractices in the East India Company. The Supreme Court found Hickey guilty and sentenced him to jail. A few other papers of that time, like Calcutta Gazette, Oriental Magazine, and Calcutta Chronicle, were docile media and published everything agreeing to the norms. A decade later, William Duane, the Irish American, in his paper Bengal Journal, wrote in support of the French Revolution. He also published an unsubstantiated report of Lord Cornwallis's death during a campaign against Tipu Sultan. Duane earned company's displeasure and was eventually deported. It was under the administration of Marquis of Wellesley, the censorship of the press was imposed. The situation changed in 1818 and the censorship was abolished by Marquis of Hastings. This was not acceptable to the high-ranking members of the governor-in-council. The directors also sent adverse comments to its Kolkata office. Hastings resigned in 1821, and the officiating Governor General John Adam, who was a typical Tory bureaucrat, soon struck a fatal blow to the free press. An ordinance was passed on 14th of March 1823, introducing the awful licensing system to the great delight and jubilation for the old Tories. The freedom of press extended by Hastings lasted for less than 5 years. Now, to Rammohun, liberty was not just a political freedom. It was freedom of thought, freedom of speech, freedom of expression. He instantly protested against the press ordinance by drawing up a memorial to the Justice of Supreme Court, Sir Francis Magnaten, knowing fully that his signature might have subjected him to be hanged by the next day. His memorial proved unsuccessful, and the Indian press was formally put under restrictions in April 1823. There was none but one source left for Rammohun. He then sent an appeal to the King George IV, in which he defended free expression of opinion in such a noble language that the famous philosopher Jeremy Bentham compared it with John Milton's philosophical speech for freedom of press, Areopagitica. Rammohun vigorously argued against every claim for censorship. In para 31 of the memorial, he writes, Your Majesty is well aware that a free press has never yet caused a revolution in any part of the world, whereas where no freedom of press existed and the grievances consequently remained unrepresented and unredressed, the innumerable revolutions have taken place in all parts of the globe. This memorial is a valuable document for freedom of speech and expressions. Unfortunately, politicians of this time are not very familiar with this document. Now, Rammohun, in his appeal, condemned Manhattan for not utilizing properly the mandatory 20 days interval for deliberation. He also brought a very serious allegations against the judges and the high-level British officials for entering into a previous deal to preclude the possibility of any effectual representation in favor of free press. But this well-reasoned appeal met with the same fate as did his petition to the Supreme Court. Rammohun seized the publication of his Persian paper Miratul Akbar in protest. In an appeal to the people of Persia who have honored the paper with their patronage, he said, "Excuse for non-fulfillment of my promise to make you acquainted with passing events as stated in the introductory remarks in the first number." Now, what did he try to say by excuse the non-fulfillment of my promise? Was he making use of his paper to send messages of something else? Lord Teignmouth's statement in notes in Indian Affairs validate the same. What he is saying? In course of 1824, there was scarcely a district in the upper province in which a spirit of dissatisfaction was not more or less manifested. Now, Mirat lived in for only some 16 months. This was the first and only non-cooperation at its best by a native paper. But who can deny that Rammohun was an undaunted fighter for freedom of press? His clash with Bailey and Manhattan could not in any way viewed as a mere mock fight. Now, what happened next? Did Rammohun cease to give the authorities any further headache? Actually, the press regulation was disobeyed openly and aggressively week after week for a period of 24 months. Of course, Rammohun himself could not act in the first person. Instead, he arranged for his friends like Monty D. Rosario, Villiers Holcroft, James Sutherland, Theodore Dickens to bring out papers agreeing to observe all the rules and then run them as if there is no regulation at all, till the offending paper was axed. He then started running another paper in the same plan. Likewise, Calcutta Journal, the Columbian Press Gazette, Bengal Chronicle, Calcutta Chronicle, all were either axed or threatened. He had another option, as there was no law for regulating the import of printed material. All what could not be printed in India were sent to England. And the same were then made available for Indian circulation. The awakening of the political consciousness amongst the native Indians was then frequently discussed in the Court of Proprietors. On July 9th, 1824, John Malcolm, one of the proprietors, stated that for a long time, native Indians were instigating a systematic campaign to rouse anti-British feeling in the country. Malcolm observed, I quote from Oriental Herald, January 1827 edition, which reads, they, the Kolkata group of politicians, are, to my knowledge, adepts in spreading discontent and exciting sedition and rebellion. According to Bailey and Lord Teignmouth, the political propaganda of Rammohun and his friends had been causing troubles in upper provinces, which happens to be the home of most of the native soldiers in the British Army. The local administrators had also been asking the Supreme Government to put an end to those propaganda activities. It cannot be denied that the part of India which got most convulsion had received Rammohun's political ministrations. British India had actually experienced a revolt within 1 year of gagging of the press. The rebellious propaganda was some way responsive for the Sepoy mutiny at Barakpur on the 1st of November 1824. In 1824, there was also a Sepoy mutiny, but it lasted for only 1 day. The most striking part of the massacre was that even when the Sepoys behaved outrageously and raised illegal and insubordinate demand, the in charge of the Barakpur army camp took no action against them. Rather, they sent report to the commander-in-chief of Fort William. Such inaction leads us to conclude that nothing untoward had happened on that night of 1st of November 1824. When the mutiny was suppressed, a native of Kolkata named Jagannath Mugmudre came forward to present the rebel sepoys as innocent sufferers and the government officials as merciless barbarians. Under cover of a letter of a native India, which was published in Oriental Herald, volume 7, October to December 1825, addressing to the president of Board of Control India Affairs, Mr. C.W.W. Wynne, Jagannath described the government report on the Barakpur massacre as quite vague and unsatisfactory and as far from correct. He claimed that the sepoys had done nothing wrong beyond asking for increase of batta or the allowance given to the army to march forward, which on the former occasions was increased when the company's troops were sent on distant expeditions. He also added, as they continued to insist upon their claim, the other troops were commanded to fire upon them, which they did accordingly, and dispersing and cutting to pieces the whole regiment, and thus fell without resistance, or were afterwards put to death between 400 and 500 men by the hands of their fellow soldiers. By referring to the corrective measures taken against the sepoys, Jagannath openly called the Governor General Amherst a liar, a tyrant, and a murderer. Jagannath was a native Hindu and a resident of Kolkata, well versed in English and not pleased with the press in its shackled state. He was very much critical about the Kolkata-based English paper John Bull, which was distinguished for its adoration for the local authorities and famous for notorious misrepresentations. he was very much critical about the Amherst government and suggested that the whole affairs of the country to be placed under superintendence of a council composed of 12 to 20 persons of talent and experience who from long residence in India are well versed in the affairs of the country. What, however, gives this later a place in the history is that a native formally proposing the supreme government to divest of all but merely the executive power to the governor general, subject to the control of the council. Now, the question arises, who was Jagannath Moghutre? During 1820s, there was only one person satisfying all the specifications that Jagannath possessed, Raja Rammohun Roy. It is far easier to believe that Jagannath Moghutre and Raja Rammohun Roy were one and the same person, rather than to believe that Jagannath to be another man with identical quality, but remain unknown to all. For obvious reasons, the political letters sent to England and published after 1823 were either written anonymously or under any assumed name. So it can be well believed that the originator of the letter was Rammohun himself. Now the question arises, if Rammohun and his political friends were indulging in anti-establishment propaganda in Bengal and in the upper provinces, then they had been committing treason, which leads to death penalty or arrest under Regulation 3 of 1818, to be kept in detention till death without citing any reason. His European friends also knew that they could be seized at any time and deported out of India. Yet they continued to instigate a systematic campaign to rouse anti-British feeling in the country. But how could they escape the hangman's rope? John Palmer, he was director of one of the directors of the East India Company, was Rammohun's intimate friend. And the political group of England that sponsored Rammohun was backed by Palmer brothers. Palmers were also very close to George IV, the King of Britain at that time. Also, Lord Hastings and George IV were more than friends. Apparently, so long as Hastings was the Governor General of India, Rammohun and his political associates enjoyed some sort of protection. But soon after his departure, gagging of press happened, and Buckingham was deported for his role in India. Stanford Arnott was a political assistant of Rammohun, and for that reason, he was also ordered out of India. Buckingham left the country, but Arnott fled to Chandanagar, which was then under France. He was then later arrested and deported. Perhaps this was the first political arrest by the British government in a French territory. Rammohun also had his share of sufferings. By July 1824, Radha Prasad, the elder son of Rammohun, was prosecuted for embezzlement of government's fund while acting as Naib Shiristadar of Bardhaman Collectorate. Though the case against Radha Prasad was not an extraordinary kind, still he was tried at the highest criminal court. The special prosecutor, Edmund Moloney, took every possible step to obtain his conviction. Knowing fully the very intention of Moloney, the acting Chief Justice Courtney Smith directed the circuit judge to quote just having the guy. It means what he said. I just tell you. Conduct yourself towards Moloney as you would conduct yourself towards any ordinary prosecutor. Courtney Smith also directed the judge to communicate with the witness in native languages so that all which passes between the judge and the prosecutor may be understandable to the all who present in the court. Moloney was then enjoying Supreme Authority's confidence and at once forwarded these directives to Lord Amherst. After 2 years, Radha Prasad was honorably acquitted by the bench, while the accuser, Shiv Narayan Rai, was punished. When the charge misfired at court against a direct complaint of Moloney, Justice Smith was suspended for his opinion as to a matter judicially brought before him, which was not agreeable to the government. He was finally dismissed with 35 years of service to his credit. This happened in March 1827. The Calcutta Chronicle published this news in the very next month, and its license was cancelled in May 1827. Not only Radha Prasad, but some near and distant relations of Rammohun, like Kunjo Bihari Roy, Govinda Prasad Rai, Ramchandra Gangulee, was made party to this case. If we go through the petition of Radha Prasad to Lord Bentinck in 1828, it will be clear how Moloney on so many occasions unnecessarily and enviously brought Rammohun into the court proceedings. This petition is very interesting, and for the petition, you may go to the most authentic book edited by Rama Prasad Chandra and Jyotindra Kumar Mojumdar's selection from official letters and documents relating to life of Raja Rammohun Roy. The torture and persecution that Radha Prasad had for the period under trial resulted in death of his mother and also a complete breakdown of Rammohun's health. In a letter to J.B. Estlin in 7th of February 1827, Rammohun writes, for a period of more than 2 years, owing to most affecting circumstances arising from the hostile feelings of some individuals towards my family, I found myself unable to pursue any undertaking or carry out correspondence even with those whom I sincerely loved and revered. In some biographies of Rammohun, this persecution of Radha Prasad has been praised as conspiracy of Maharaja of Burdwan. But what appears to have been overlooked is the unusual action and reaction of the court of directors. In those dark days, Rammohun's European friend James Sutherland rendered great service to him. According to Sutherland, Rammohun Roy faced ruin and his son the gallows because of the displeasure of the court of directors. Between 1810 to 1823, the Spanish colonies of South America, like Argentina, Chile, Colombia, and others, liberated themselves from the despotism of Spain. Rammohun was closely watching these developments. A letter written by one of his English friend, then living in Kolkata, appeared in the September issue of Edinburgh Magazine, from which I like to read out the portion. But the lively interest he took in the progress of South American emancipation eminently marks the greatness and benevolence of his mind, and was created, he said, by the perusal of the detestable barbarities inflicted by Spain to subjugate and afterwards continued by the Inquisition to retain in bondage that unhappy country. In fact, Rammohun tried to follow the American pattern of struggle for ending the foreign domination in India. N.B. Edmonstone, the director of the East India Company, in his speech on 19th of June 1822, clearly told his fellow directors, I like to quote some portion of it from Subarna and Ashoklal Ghosh's book in this context. There was at this moment a powerful engine at work laboring to effect this purpose, that is, relieving themselves from the subjection to this country. I have seen a paper in which both North and South America were held as examples to be followed by India. It should be remembered that Rammohun Roy championed the struggle for freedom and democratic rights not for Indians alone, but for the entire world. In 1820, the Colonial Patriots, after long struggle, forced the oppressive king of Spain to revive the original Colonial Constitution. When the news of success reached Kolkata, Rammohun was overjoyed at the victory of the people over the king. He organized an elegant dinner for about 60 Spaniards living in Kolkata and celebrated by illuminating his own residence. In that banquet, he instantly composed and delivered a speech on religion and political freedom. Upon being asked why he had celebrated, he replied, "What ought I to be insensible to the sufferings of my fellow creatures, wherever they are, or howsoever unconnected by interest, religion, and language?" In August 1821, he got the news that Neapolitan freedom fighters had suffered a setback. On the day of the executions of Michel Morelli and Joseph Silvati, he postponed all his work and back home wrote to Buckingham with regret, "My mind is depressed by the late unhappy news from Europe. I am obliged to conclude that I shall not live to see liberty universally restored to the nations of Europe and Asia, especially those that are European colonies. Under these circumstances, I consider the cause of the Neapolitans as my own and their enemies as ours. Enemies of liberty and friends of despotism have never been and never will be ultimately successful. French Revolution in 1830 was another event that gave him very high satisfaction. In a letter to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of France, he stated, "All mankind is one great family, of which numerous nations and tribes existing are only various branches of it." Excited by the liberal movement of the Three Glorious Days, Rammohun, on his way to England, visited two French frigates anchored in Cape Town, which flew the revolutionary tricolor flag. The national aspiration of Greece were, however, not very favorably regarded at Mirat. This attitude of Rammohun towards the rebellious Greeks was, of course, because of his sympathy with the Turkish people. But the same was later reversed, as we find in William Adams' testimony, a lecture on the life and labors of Raja Rammohun Roy. With all probability, the pro-Turkey sentiment expressed earlier in the Mirat was due to inadequate information he had received earlier, which was subsequently discarded on receipt of correct news. Rammohun Roy had plans to visit the United States, which he did not which did not ultimately happen due to his death in Bristol in 1833. Nevertheless, his image as a liberal reformer was the inspiration for the American abolitionists. His involvement with the global liberation movement was reciprocated as well. The people of Carthage dedicated the copy of the Carthage Constitution, the Constitution Politica de la Monarquía Española, to al liberalissimo, that means most liberal, del noble, sabio, wise, virtuous, Brahma, Rammohun Roy. Italy reciprocated as well by paying her tribute of gratitude to the memory of Raja Rammohun Roy, and forever associated his name to those of the martyrs Morelli and Silvati. The Englishmen close to him were directly or indirectly associated with the liberal policies of the House of Commons. As a champion of freedom and democratic rights and believer in parliamentary democracy, Rammohun wholeheartedly supported the Reform Bill agitation in England. In a letter addressed to Mrs. Woodford on 27th of April, 1832, Rammohun writes, "The struggles are not merely between the reformers and the anti-reformers, but between liberty and tyranny, though throughout the world, between justice and injustice, between right and wrong. We clearly perceive that liberal principles in politics and religion have been long, gradually, but steadily gaining ground, notwithstanding the opposition and obstinacy of despots and bigots." When Rammohun always, actually, Rammohun believed in democracy and individual freedom and greeted the liberation struggle of all the nations. Could we therefore, he therefore be so naive to agree to the continuance of foreign rule in his own country? He believed that the enemy of justice and enemy of liberty should be defeated. Can by any stretch of imagination be said that he had approved the colonial hegemony? Of course, he always cherished the idea that the native Indians should avail themselves of the opportunity to use better method and technique and enjoy all rights that their English counterparts enjoy. But what he could not apprehend is that the foreign rulers neither allow the people of a political submissive country to enjoy the democratic rights, nor they would be interested in building up a prosperous India. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ganguly. That was really a deep insight into the works of Rammohun and how he cherished freedom. He actually cherished freedom, not only, as you had said, for him, for the soul, but also for the people, and also for the freedom for the whole citizens of the world. So thank you, Mr. Ganguly. That was very interesting. And I hope the audience who had been listening to you really felt themselves enriched by this knowledge.
Thank you.
In case the people from the audience, you have any questions, you can unmute yourselves and ask the question, or you may place it in chat. We will take a few questions now. Is there any question from anybody? You can unmute yourself and ask. Otherwise, you can put it on chat as well. As of now, we do not see any questions. So may I request Jyoti Ghosh to propose a vote of thanks? There's a raised hand, so I think there's been a raised hand. So it's from Galaxy A31. So do you have a question? We cannot hear him, or there's information on chat regarding his or question or not. So, okay, so I will request Jayati Gupta, if you can please propose the vote of thanks.
Right, I think, I don't know, people haven't asked any questions, but very definitely it was a very illuminating talk. There was a lot of archival material which came in. And I think most importantly, there were two things which I think, I would like to observe about the talk is that the role of the press and the censorship of the press later on, that was extremely important at this point of time in 19th century India. And the way in which the gagging of the press was one of the ways in which freedom could be, taken away. That was, one very interesting observation, which we also, get elsewhere. But most importantly, I think what Mr. Gangulee has actually done is that he has refuted the controversy regarding Rammohun Roy, that he was pro-British, that he was for Western education, and completely that was his identity in that sense of the term. And we hear so much of his social reforms, especially the Sati tracts, etc. That this aspect of Rammohun as a liberal who was an upholder of political freedom all over the world, that is not highlighted. And I think, in Mr. Das, your forum, you had this short documentary on slavery by Shashwati Ghosh and
Shuman Ghosh.
Yes. Yes. There was one mention of his not being able to go to America, but being part of the abolitionist movement. So I think, if we tie up these, if we can, get to these archival material, open up the archival material, we're going to have a very interesting dimension to Rammohun, which will refute the way in which he is often portrayed, especially by fundamentalists. So that. So thank you very much, Mr. Gangulee, for a very interesting talk. I would also like to take this opportunity on behalf of the Citizens Forum to thank Mr. Amit Das, who is the one who helps us with this, this platform, who also introduced you to the audience. And of course, I would like to thank all who attended this very interesting session. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for being a patient listener. And I believe that we all have been enriched by Mr. Gangulee's view, the way he has portrayed Rammohun as, the first colonial patriot, because the facts that he had brought in really sets one to look into more, and especially the references that he has given of James Sutherland and others. So really gives one the pleasure of going into further and looking into these archival materials. So thank you, everybody. We will share this recording over YouTube. So I will share this recording with everybody and with Sudokina, and I hope she will pass it on to all of you. So hope you all had a nice, enriching evening. And thank you once again. Do stay safe, everybody, and take care and stay healthy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amit.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We are ending the meeting here. Namaskar.